6 masked men cut through a chain-link fence at JFK Airport in New York carrying guns and handcuffs. 64 minutes later, they vanish with $5.8 million in cash and jewelry. That's over $28 million in today's money. It was the largest cash robbery in American history at that time. But this wasn't just a heist. This was the spark that started one of the most brutal killing sprees in organized crime history. The stolen money would never be recovered. The mastermind would never be convicted. 13 people connected to this robbery would end up dead. This is how the perfect crime became the perfect nightmare. The heist started with a desperate gambler drowning in debt. Martin Krugman was a small-time bookmaker who had gambled more than he could afford to lose. When you owe money to the mob, you don't get payment plans. You get desperate. That desperation drove Krugman to the bars around JFK Airport, where cargo workers drank away their troubles after long shifts. In one smoke-filled tavern, a friend mentioned something that changed everything. This friend worked the cargo terminals and noticed what most people overlooked. German airline Lufthansa flew in large shipments of currency to its cargo terminal at JFK Airport every week. Millions of dollars were stored in that warehouse with almost no security. Krugman wasn't a robber. He was just a guy who took bets. So he reached out to the only person he knew who moved in dangerous circles. Henry Hill was a mid-level drug dealer connected to the Lucchese crime family, but not Italian enough to be a made man. Hill immediately recognized the potential, but knew this was too big for either of them alone. He knew exactly who to take this golden tip to. The one man at JFK Airport with the skills and connections and ruthless ambition to turn insider information into the biggest crime of his career. James Burke was known as Jimmy the Gent. This nickname masked his true nature. He got his moniker from giving away stolen merchandise to buy loyalty. But those who crossed him learned his generosity had deadly limits. At 47, he had become JFK Airport's unofficial crime boss through years of hijacking trucks and robbing armored cars. When Hill brought him Krugman's tip, Burke listened with the focused intensity of a predator. This wasn't just another truck heist. This could set him up for life. Burke wasn't some amateur who would rush in blindly. What followed was 3 months of meticulous preparation that transformed a desperate gambler's tip into the most audacious airport robbery in American history. For 3 months, Burke drove past the isolated Lufthansa cargo terminal daily. He was timing security rounds and memorizing shift changes. The building's isolation made it perfect for moving millions, but it also made it vulnerable to the right predator. Burke needed someone on the inside. Louis Werner was a Lufthansa cargo worker whose gambling debts put him in the same desperate position as Krugman. Burke's network identified Werner as someone who could be bought. With his inside man secured, Burke carefully selected each member of his crew. Tommy DeSimone became his enforcer. DeSimone was a violent psychopath whose reputation for killing over minor slights made him perfect for intimidating witnesses. The other crew members were veterans whose loyalty Burke trusted and whose skills complemented each other perfectly. The plan was elegantly simple. Strike during the 3 a.m. shift when only a skeleton crew worked the building. Get in, overpower the workers, grab the cash, disappear before anyone could raise an alarm. Burke calculated they'd walk away with about $1 million. Then fate delivered one more twist. Days before the planned heist, Werner discovered the December 11th shipment would be different. German banks were sending extra cash to America before Christmas holidays. The haul wouldn't be $1 million. It would be nearly 6 times that amount. This transformed their ambitious robbery into something unprecedented in American criminal history. But with incredible opportunity came incredible risk. A score this large would bring intense federal investigation. December 10th, 1978. Burke's crew gathered in a Queens safe house. Tension filled the air as they prepared for the next few hours. They'd stolen a black Ford van and checked every piece of equipment. At 3:12 a.m., 6 armed figures approached the Lufthansa cargo building. Werner had kept his promise. The side door was unlocked. They slipped inside without a sound. The layout was burned into their memories. A security guard making his routine rounds never knew what hit him. Within minutes, every Lufthansa employee on the night shift was handcuffed and forced to the floor. Burke's crew already knew exactly where to go. What they found exceeded even their wildest expectations. Instead of the expected $6 million, they discovered $5.8 million in cash stuffed into canvas bags. Stacked alongside was another fortune in jewelry, precious stones and gold destined for dealers across America. For the next hour, they worked with perfect precision. They formed a human chain, passing bag after bag from storage room to van. The handcuffed employees watched millions disappear before their eyes. By 4:16 a.m., exactly 64 minutes after entering, they had vanished with the largest cash haul in American criminal history. 6 men who believed they'd just pulled off the perfect crime. They had no idea they'd just doomed themselves. Burke now faced a problem his planning hadn't fully anticipated. What do you do with $5.8 million in hot cash when every serial number is recorded and every law enforcement agency is watching for it to surface? These bills were as traceable as stolen artwork. The crew needed to lay low, but laying low with such an enormous score proved psychologically challenging. According to the original plan, each crew member would receive an equal share after Burke's organizer cut. But as Burke stared at the massive pile of cash, his paranoia overrode his business judgment. He convinced himself that giving his crew large amounts would make them reckless and dangerous to everyone's freedom. So Burke made a decision that violated one of organized crime's cardinal rules. He decided to screw over his own crew. He kept the majority for himself and gave them payments that were substantial but nowhere near what they'd risked their lives to steal. The crew's reaction was immediate and explosive. These weren't men accustomed to being cheated, especially after pulling off the crime of the century. Some grumbled openly about being screwed over. Others, feeling they had nothing left to lose, began spending their smaller payouts on expensive cars and jewelry that clearly didn't match their supposed legitimate income. The very behavior Burke had feared began manifesting, but now driven by anger rather than celebration. Crew members who should have been lying low were making themselves visible through expensive purchases and loose talk in bars frequented by criminals and informants. Within days, the first major mistake exposed the operation. Parnell Stacks Edwards was supposed to dispose of the getaway van to eliminate evidence, but instead, he parked it illegally on a Brooklyn street, where it was discovered by police 2 days later. The van contained fingerprints and other leads that immediately brought federal attention to the crew. Burke was furious. On December 18, 1978, just 1 week after the heist, Stacks Edwards was murdered by Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Sipi on Burke's orders. It was a cold reminder to everyone involved. Screw-ups wouldn't be tolerated. But the damage was done. Within weeks, FBI agents seemed everywhere. They were interviewing anyone connected to the cargo building. They were questioning crew associates. They were following leads that came uncomfortably close to the truth. Several crew members had been directly questioned about December 11th. While they kept silent, the pressure was clearly affecting their behavior. Then came the moment Burke had been dreading. On May 16, 1979, Louis Werner was arrested and charged with conspiracy in the Lufthansa robbery. Werner's arrest sent shockwaves through the crew. If Werner cooperated with federal agents for a reduced sentence, he could provide testimony that would destroy them all. He knew the planning. He knew the participants. Most dangerously, he could identify Burke as the mastermind. Burke now faced the most critical decision of his criminal career. His choice would transform the greatest heist in American history into one of the most brutal murder sprees in organized crime history. Burke decided to eliminate the crisis permanently through the most brutal solution imaginable. He would systematically kill anyone who could potentially testify against him. His hit list included crew members and their girlfriends. It also included family members and anyone who might have gained knowledge through casual conversation. The scope was unprecedented even by organized crime standards. The first to die was Martin Krugman. He was the bookmaker whose tip had started everything. On January 6, 1979, he was lured to a motel under false pretenses. Despite Henry Hill begging Burke to spare him, Krugman was beaten, shot, and dismembered. His usefulness ended the moment he started loudly demanding his share of the loot. Just 11 days later, on January 17, 1979, Richard Eaton was found dead. He was a drug dealer, an associate. He was suspected of skimming money from the operation. His body was discovered in the back of an abandoned trailer. The body was frozen nearly solid. It was like a 6-foot slab of ice. It took 2.5 days just to thaw the body. He had been strangled and hogtied. Then he was left inside a refrigerated meat truck. Then came the most shocking hit yet. On February 10, 1979, Teresa Ferreira was found dead. She had once been romantically involved with both Eaton and DeSimone. Her headless torso washed up on the Jersey shore. Burke believed she had been leaking information. In March 1979, Tom Monteleone and Louis Roast Beef Cafora both vanished. Both men were known for flashing stolen money in public. Neither body was ever recovered, but the message was clear. Attracting attention meant a death sentence. The bloodshed escalated. On May 16, 1979, 2 crucial insiders were found dead inside a parked Buick. Joe Buddha Manry and Robert Frenchie McMahon had both been killed by close-range gunfire. They had been part of the inner circle with direct knowledge of the operation. Just a month later, on June 13, 1979, Paolo Licastri was found shot and burned in a Brooklyn lot. Licastri was a Gambino family associate, suspected of withholding his own cut. The message again was that no one was untouchable. Then came the final known hit, tied directly to Lufthansa. In July of 1984, Angelo Sepe was killed. Sepe was one of Burke's trusted men and enforcers. He was not killed by Burke, but by his own mafia family. He had fallen out of favor over other unrelated thefts. However, the timing still traced back to the long, bloody shadow of the heist. Late December 1978 brought another shocking development. Somewhere between these killings, Tommy DeSimone vanished without a trace. His body was never found. Most believe the Gambino family murdered him in retaliation. They wanted revenge for the unsanctioned killing of made man Billy Batts. This murder was not directly connected to Lufthansa, but Tommy's disappearance only added to the fear and chaos inside Burke's circle. Henry Hill watched this systematic elimination with growing horror. He came to a sinking realization: he was next. As one of the few who knew the entire plan and Burke's role in it, Hill became a prisoner of paranoia. He changed his routes constantly. He avoided familiar faces. He looked over his shoulder at every stoplight. Then, in April 1980, Hill was arrested on drug trafficking charges. He was facing 25 years to life. But he wasn't just afraid of prison. He was afraid Burke would silence him permanently. That's when the FBI made their offer. They promised protection in exchange for testimony. After weeks of internal torture, Henry Hill made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He flipped. What he gave the FBI was far bigger than Lufthansa. Hill's cooperation exposed years of criminal activity. This included hijackings, drug rings, bribery, and murder. His testimony ultimately led to 50 convictions. These included Paul Vario and James Burke himself. But here's the cruel irony. Despite all his knowledge, no one was ever convicted for the Lufthansa heist itself. The money was gone. The evidence was destroyed. The witnesses were dead. Burke was eventually convicted, but not for Lufthansa. Instead, he was found guilty of murdering Richard Eaton. He was sentenced to life in prison. The mastermind behind the biggest cash robbery in U.S. history was never legally tied to the heist he orchestrated. Meanwhile, Louis Werner served a few years in prison for his minor role. Then he walked away. FBI investigations later confirmed the death toll. At least 13 people tied to the Lufthansa robbery were murdered. It remains one of the most extensive post-crime elimination campaigns in organized crime history. Burke died behind bars in 1996. He never revealed where the money went. Henry Hill lived under federal protection for the rest of his life. He was always looking over his shoulder. He died in 2012, haunted by the bloodshed he helped unleash. As for the $5.8 million, it was never found. Not a dollar was traced. Not a gem was recovered. The perfect crime may have led to a perfect nightmare, but in the eyes of the law, it remained legally perfect.